This includes in Global South countries. We cannot afford to follow the pathways that Global North countries have used for centuries. African countries can indeed develop sustainably, but we need to increase financial flows to Global South countries to support this development. Phasing out fossil fuels is not just about the reduction of carbon emissions. It's also about energy affordability. Fossil fuel companies have been making windfall profits amidst an energy crisis. It's also about land rights. Fossil fuel companies are drilling oil on indigenous people's lands, causing oil spills like in the Niger Delta. The Conference of Parties and the UNFCCC mechanism has failed to get us to where we need to achieve the 1.5 goal. Both the participation of the fossil fuel industry and the huge focus on false solutions like carbon markets and geoengineering in these conferences brings into question the legitimacy of the UNFCCC mechanism in tackling the climate crisis. Member states must support a conflict of interest policy and increase transparency in these processes. The excuse given around having the fossil fuel industry in these spaces is that we need all stakeholders, including the fossil fuel industry, to solve the crisis. But the fossil fuel industry have proven to be bad faith actors. For decades, we have had the presence of the fossil fuel industry in these spaces, and last year we literally had 600 delegates. And I think history records will show that in 2023, for COP28, metaphorically speaking, we let a mosquito lead the fight against malaria. It's a stab in the back for communities who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, but also the future generations who will be affected adversely by the climate crisis. The transition, we need a just transition to renewable energy. And the transition does not mean moving from big oil to big renewables and replicating the same business models that are used by the fossil fuel industry. A just transition means that it has to be equitable. A lot of the minerals that are necessary to power the transition to renewable energy are mined in Global South countries. The mining of these minerals are marred with human rights abuses like exploitation and child labor. I come from Kenya, a country that is flaunted as a climate leader, being a country that gets around 90% and more than 70% of Kenyans having access to electricity. Although is this climate justice? Climate justice is class justice. And Kenya has signed power purchasing agreements with independent power producers, which are distorted from the market value. They're extremely expensive and unaffordable. At the same time, climate justice is land justice, and a lot of these renewable energy projects have been constructed on indigenous people's lands where there has been no free and informed consent, and we do not need to, we are not moving from just replicating the same energy models. We need sustainable, community-led renewable energy. I end my intervention by joining governments like Fiji in calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Yesterday, Fiji reaffirmed its commitment to the Port Vila Accord for a just transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific in a statement during a side event here in the SBs. The Paris Agreement doesn't have a single mention of the F word, the fossil fuels. Yet, it is what we need to reduce in order to reach the 1.5 goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. And finally, turn to you, Greta.
It will be impossible for us to stick to the 1.5 degree limit without a rapid, equitable fossil fuel phase-out. We are now experiencing greenhouse gas emissions at an all-time high, and it is the coming months and the coming years right now that will be crucial in what the future will look like. It is what we decide now that will define the rest of humanity's future. And whether we choose to do that or not, if we don't, it will be a death sentence to countless of people, and it is already a death sentence to countless of people living on the front lines of the climate crisis today. Why the word equitable is a key word in this dialogue is because we need the countries who are the most responsible for this crisis, the countries who have started this crisis and the countries who are fueling this crisis, to be held accountable and to lead this. And we are now here in this conference, and we have the science, and we have the traditional knowledge we need in order to act, in order to make a complete U-turn and to make a just, rapid transition. But the political will is nowhere to be seen. The people in power are spending their time looking for false solutions and finding and creating loopholes which maintains business as usual and keeps them in the position of power. And our responsibility and our role here as activists in conferences like this is to call them out and to tell the truth. And the truth now is that these processes are failing. They are failing us here in this room, they are failing our children, they are failing all of humanity and the future generations to come, but most importantly, they are failing the people bearing the brunt of this crisis today and have been for the last decades. And this is nothing new. This has been said for countless decades by the people experiencing the consequences of this crisis, by the experts and the scientists. They have been warning us, but their warnings have been drowned in greenwashing and lies from people in power. We're still rushing towards the cliff, and we are at the verge of potential tipping points that once we pass them, there might be no going back, and we might trigger feedback loops beyond human control that may
And that's why the Marshall Islands keeps coming back year after year to do so. And we keep coming back, and it's the same this year as it is every year. Our expectations are very high because the path that we're on is so destructive. And so the responsibility of a COP president must match those expectations. And that's why we're here, to ensure that our voice is part of the chorus that says we need to keep ourselves on the path to 1.5. Anything else is unacceptable.
I think I saw a question back here, gentlemen, and I think we'll go ahead, and then the gentleman behind you, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Tim Werner, plant-based tree.
I think I saw a question back here, gentlemen, and I think we'll go ahead, and then the gentleman behind you, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Tim Werner, plant-based tree. Warming. So why aren't we talking about changing our food systems?
Well, thank you for that question. This conference is about phasing out fossil fuels, but you're absolutely right that fossil fuels is not the only part of the problem. Maybe I can ask Claire, because I know Climate Analytics has done some work on overall GHG reductions that we need to achieve, how we need to deal with the land and agriculture systems, which are another major part of the problem.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the IPCC is very clear that we need transitions across all systems. So yes, we have to focus on fossil fuels in particular because we need such rapid cuts and because they are so emissions intensive, but we do need rapid transitions across all systems. There's no wiggle room there. In our report that we released today, we showed that total greenhouse gas emissions need to fall 8% per year and out to 2030. That's to halve by 2030. We also looked at methane. And total methane emissions need to be cut by 34%, so beyond what the Global Methane Pledge says. And that, of course, requires changes to how we produce our food. Of course, while making sure that everyone has access to healthy food. But yeah, we need systems transitions across the board.
And I would say that there have been a number of very good side events over the course of the last week and a half here. Unfortunately, I've been following the negotiations, so haven't attended as many as I want. But many good side events on global food, agriculture, sustainable agriculture, land use. I think most of those have been archived, so you can watch them later on. But there's a number of organizations here working on that important front. The gentleman 2 rows behind you in the green, and then we'll go up here and then to you.
Hi, I'm Josh Gabatis from Carbon Brief. This is mainly to the representatives from Marshall Islands and Colombia, and maybe also to Eric. Lots of developing countries here, including some major fossil fuel producers, have made it clear that their efforts to move away from fossil fuels are dependent on much more climate finance from the global north. Do you accept that argument, and what is the path forward if developed countries continue to withhold sufficient funds?
When do you want to start with that one?
The gaps are clear across the system. We need to address all of the gaps, and finance is the key to unlocking and getting the change we need, whether it's on mitigation-related issues for my country in adaptation right now, and I think Sebastian spoke to this, an entire change of the financial architecture and the systems that are fueling, if I can use that word, the way we live today. That's essentially what needs to be contemplated. So I don't know. I think if your question was, it's an either or. You know, the Marshall Islands, along with all of the small and developing states have been very clear. We need the financing. We need the financing to implement, but we also need the ambition, and these two go together. It's an ambition and implementation. So we need both, and we need everyone to do it, but certainly we need those who have the most emissions and the most impacts, the major emitters. They need to move furthest and fastest, but we all need to move.
Sebastian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is a very important question. I think that if countries like Colombia needs to make investment for 2 or 3 points of its GDP per year to transform its economy, there is a huge, it's enormous. And there is not a single solution to do so. There's not a silver bullet to solve the climate finance problem. And what we think that market conditions, capital conditions, we need to create the right conditions to move our economies to a decarbonized scenario. And that's the reason why we think that at the global level, there are many principles that we need to rethink. We need to change. What are the ratings? What are the considerations of the capital cost? How we can get the investment we need in our countries to transform our economies? And this is a problem from the global north. But we need also to create fiscal space in our countries if we want to make the public investment we need to do and take care of our people and doing our part back home. So we have been talking a lot about innovative financial solutions, different approaches. We cannot continue thinking in the same approach, thinking in loans, thinking in expensive capital to make investment. There is not a solution there. We need to find the right solutions to create fiscal space. We need to create the right solutions to reduce the cost of capital and create the right market conditions to make the investment we need in our economy. So that's a full systemic change. There is a mosaic of solutions. There is not a single solution to solve this approach, and we need to be clear on what kind of climate finance we need. So that's the reason why metrics are important. How much do we need to do what? Is that private? Is that public? We need to be transparent on the needs we have. And we need to talk all the language of investors, private investors, public investors. We need to create the conditions to transform this economy, our economies, and we need to go deeper on this. So, and this is part also of the negotiations on climate finance this week.
Thank you. And Eric, your name was mentioned. Do you want to make a comment on climate finance?
Yeah. I think your question is actually true across so many areas, including adaptation, climate finance, and of course the just transition to renewable energy, that it is dependent on financial flows from the global north. And so far, there is a commitment of $100 billion by 2020 to support global south countries in terms of climate finance, but this finance has not been met. In fact, if anything, it is not climate justice in the sense that a huge percentage of it, around 80%, has been given in form of debt, meaning that global south countries have to pay back to global north countries for a crisis they had the least role in causing. And that is why climate justice is debt justice. We need fair forms of finance to global south countries to support the just transition, to support adaptation, and even loss and damage. And so far, where the money is that governments are giving a lot of money towards fossil fuel subsidies and funding the fossil fuel industry, meaning that that means that you're funding more loss and damage.
Thank you very much. I would also just note that helpfully we have a summit in Paris next Thursday and Friday that have been designed to allow governments to show how they're going to transform the global financial system. President Macron is convening a summit for a new global financial pact and it will look at not just climate finance, but the entire financial architecture that's not addressing the debt crisis, not addressing development needs, not addressing a number of sustainable development goals. And hopefully we will get some signals out of that conference that will bear fruit before Dubai and help address this issue. Let's take the next question here in the row.
Thank you. Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media. I've got a couple of questions for Greta. Firstly, you're back at the UNFCCC meeting today for the first time in some time, I think. Why did you choose to come here this week? And secondly, in relation to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, are you a supporter of the treaty, and if so, why?
I chose to go here simply because I could, and I think that if we have a possibility to try to impact something, we should. It's just as simple as that. These conferences are, of course, very difficult for young people, especially young people affected by the climate crisis from the global south. And of course, that needs to change, because we can't pretend to be solving a crisis where we don't invite the people who are actually affected by the crisis. And of course, I'm very privileged in order to be here. Many of the activists in the climate movement haven't been given visas, or they have been having huge troubles with funding and accommodation and so on. So I'm very grateful to be able to be here, among many others, and I'm very aware of the fact that I am privileged to be here. And why I support the treaty is because I support everything that I think is moving us towards in the right direction. And right now, there won't be one silver bullet, one thing that solves everything. But if we put all our ideas forward, and if everyone pushes from every possible direction and angle, we will move in the right direction. And hopefully that will lead us somewhere better than we were before.
Thank you very much. Question here in the back, and then we'll come up to you here.
Matthew Carr from Kazi.org, a climate policy news site. Sorry to pick on you, Greta, but I've got two quick ones for you as well, just because you are such an important voice. A lot of the debate about fossil fuels is about scaling back, but environmental lobbyists don't seem to give the fossil fuel companies anywhere to go. By labelling carbon capture and carbon credits as fake solutions, isn't it true that you're actually standing in the way of the market reforms needed to solve the crisis? As Sebastian just mentioned, changing the market rules is absolutely essential, because there's no way we're going to change global capitalism in such a quick order as 2050. And my second one, yesterday there was a fascinating press conference in Washington at the National Press Club about a 80-year cover-up by US officials and other people in the military-industrial complex about electromagnetic technology that could have solved this crisis decades ago. And this is interestingly related to the crashes of alien or UAP, UFO-type craft and recovery of it. Again, it seems wild, but it's true, and it's increasingly true that it's true. If there has been an 80-year cover-up, what would be your response?
I don't think we're standing in the way of progress if we call false solutions for what they actually are. That we believe that we can replace immediate emissions cuts and phasing out fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, and the things that the fossil fuel companies are lobbying for if we believe that will solve it, we're just trying to solve the crisis with the same mentality that got us into it. We can't. It is not possible for us, as Claire explained here. Maybe you want to talk about that a bit more, but I don't think we're standing in the way for calling things what they actually are. And if it was a cover-up, what my reaction would be, I think we would have a great time.
Yeah, I think we might need an alien invasion to get us stop fighting with each other and solve this problem, actually. Maybe that would be exactly what we need. But I would just amplify what Greta said. I think you heard from Claire their analysis showing that CCS could provide 0.1% of the emissions reduction needed in the power sector. Now, there are different views probably at this table and certainly in the environmental community about the long-term role of carbon capture and storage and whether in fact it's needed for hard-to-abate sectors or to contribute to net negative emissions that the IPCC says we need in the second half of this century. But I think we are all united in the fact that in the near term, in this critical decade, which is the purpose of the mitigation work program and what the IPCC says we need to do if we're going to keep 1.5 even barely within reach, is CCS is at best a sideshow and a distraction. It's not a major part of the near-term solution, and so to the extent that it provides false hope that somehow we can avoid the kind of reductions in fossil fuel production and use that Claire talked about in her report, it's not helpful. So I think that's the perspective we want to put it in. We've got a question here on the aisle.
Thank you. Thais Lara from Canal de la Ciudad. I have two questions for Tina and Sebastian, maybe following the first question of my colleague. How do you see possible to work on a phase out and not a phase down, as the COP28 president mentioned of fossil fuel in the COP28 decision, considering, again, and maybe more in depth, the conflict of interest that he represents, but also the strong differences that we are seeing here, even just to approve an agenda. And for Eric and Greta, there are some climate youth organizations that are supporting the exploitation of gas in the name of development and in the name that is a resource for the transition. What is your opinion on that, or how the movement work globally in such crucial themes as these ones? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first is Sebastian for the question about the COP president and the path forward.
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I don't know if we need to wait until Thursday to have a more clear understanding of this, but what I say in a previous intervention is that we need a broader approach. There is an approach from the phase down, but there is other approach for the phase out. And those are political signals. Those are also economic signals. The position of Colombia is we need to go for phased out of fossil fuels. We understand that the current fossil fuels infrastructure is enough. We don't need more fossil fuels infrastructure for under development. We need to grow our renewable matrix. We need also to manage energy inefficiency. We need to manage energy consumption. We need to change behaviors. So that's the approach. So that's important to have clear political signals for those countries like Colombia who needs to go for a different approach. And be transparent with civil society, be transparent with other stakeholders out of this conversation, explaining them what are the differences, what it implies. What is the approach if I'm going for the phase down? What is the approach if I'm going for the phase out? And this is a transparency matter, and I think that it represents different approaches.